it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Who Wants Candy, Fright Mice, and All the Spooks. So I have stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Echo Park Spooktacular Halloween 6x6. So I'm going to flip through until I find the page that I want to use as my color inspiration, and I will tuck that under my cardstock panel. I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers, and I am going to start with the little deer. So I have pulled out E53, E55, and E57. I'm coloring darkest to lightest, so I am starting with the E57 and laying in my shadows at the base of the ears and then up on the forehead under the hat brim, along the back of the arms and legs, and anywhere that the body would be casting a shadow, like that little area above the hindquarters towards the beginning of the foot. And then once I have my shadows laid in, I'll start to blend that out with my midtone, which is going to be the E55. And I am just pulling that darker color into this midtone. So I am going right over the very edge of the previous shade and just pulling it into the white area, but making sure to leave plenty of room for the highlight, which is going to be the E53. So I'll just fill in any remaining white space that I wanted to be in this darker brown combo with that E53, and I am coloring right over the little spots on the hindquarters because they're really small and hard to color around, and it's super easy to just go back in with a white gel pen later, so I'm just going to color right over them. Then I added a bit of shading to the white parts of the body with the E53, and I will bring in E50 and E51 to blend that out. So the E51 first, and then I will soften that a little bit farther with the E50. I am not going to fill in all of the white space. I will leave some of that white for an extra highlight, just so that it still looks like a creamy white and not just like a light brown. Then I'm going to use the same shades for my hedgehog's body. So I'm starting with the E53 for him, and then I'm going to blend out with the E51. And this time I will color him in completely with that E50 because I do want him to look kind of light brown. When it comes to his spikes, I wanted to go a bit darker, so I brought in E59 and started to add some of that in. I'm just doing little dash lines and making sure to space them out so that I have room for some other colors to throw into the mix. So I'll switch to E57 and add a bit of that. And then I'll come in with the E55 and just continue kind of filling in the white space that remains, but I will leave a little bit of the white space because that makes the spikes look a bit shiny. And then I'm going to go back to that E50 and E51 to do the white areas on my fox, just adding a touch of that E51. And then I will blend out with the E50, and I'm going to leave some white space just like I did on the lighter part of the deer. And I'm going to do the same combo on the little mouse's belly and the inside of the ears, and that way all of the animals will have this tone on them to kind of tie them together. For the rest of the mouse, I'm going to go with my favorite combo for mice, which is W00 with E70, E71, and E74. So I'm adding in the E74 for the shadows, and then I'll start to blend that out with the E71. This combo is kind of like a mix between a gray and a brown. It's like a grayish, and I really, really love it for different critters, but especially mice. I just think it makes them look so sweet and cuddly. So bringing in that E70 now and taking that down, filling in all of the ears and most of the rest of the body with that. But I did want a little bit of that W00 on a few little highlighted areas and on the lower part of the face. I like to keep the face nice and light so you can make out those adorable features. Then I took just the lightest two shades, the E70 and the W00, and added a little bit of shading to the lower part of the speech bubble, just to give it a little extra oomph and help it stand out so it has the same amount of dimension as the rest of the images. And then I also used the E70 to color in the sticks of my lollipops. Then I'm going to move on to my fox, and I'm going to use my favorite combo for foxes, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. And I actually have a video on how to color foxes 6 different ways with different combos. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, check out that video. I actually have one for hedgehogs and also one for mice. So the mice is 8 different ways, 8 different color combos that you can use or little details that you can add. So I'm definitely going to have to add deer to that coloring series soon. But anyway, I am starting with the YR18 for him, adding that little bit of shadow in the creases and under the hat brim, base of the tail, under the arms, and then blending out with the YR14 and then filling in with the YR12. I just really love this kind of rusty tone. I'm leaving a little bit of white space on the feet and paws, but I will come back and add something to that in a little bit. So I have quite a few other objects in this scene that I need to color orange, and I could have just kept going with the same combo that I'd used for the fox, but I wanted to kind of distinguish the difference between the living creature and the inanimate objects. So I decided to go with a brighter orange combo for the rest of these items. So I brought in YR04, YR07, and YR09. And I'm going to do the little pumpkin plastic candy holders. And then I'm also going to do the orange stripes on my candy corn. And I was trying to remember the order of the candy corn. I always forget if it's orange at the bottom or yellow at the bottom. But then I noticed there was candy corn in that pattern paper, so that was perfect. I could just look at that and see that the orange needed to go in the center. So I started with the YR09 for all of those, and then I'm blending out with the YR07, making sure to leave plenty of room for that YR04 because that's my highlight shade, and I want to make sure I have enough of that so that the coloring really looks dynamic. I did carefully color around the faces on those little jack-o'-lantern candy containers because I wasn't quite sure at the time if I wanted to color them in yellow or black. So if it would have been yellow, I would have needed them to be white, or it would have looked really kind of funky underneath. So I just left them white. It was easy enough to color around them. And then I also did a couple little stripes on some of the candies with just the YR04. Left the rest white for now. Then I'm going to move on to kind of like a duller dark brown, and I'm using E44, E47, and E49. I'm going to do the hooves for my deer with those shades, and then I'm also going to add some little dark stocking feet to my fox. At first I only did his feet, and then I ended up deciding to do his paws as well. I guess technically they're all paws, but since he's standing up, I'm just trying to differentiate which ones I'm talking about. But I blended out the E49 with the E47 and then used the E44 for the highlight and also to blend into the orange on the fox. And I think that makes him look really cute, just to have that extra little detail. And then I did throw a little bit of the E49 into the hedgehog's spikes as well, just to make them extra dynamic. Now that these critters are colored in, I'm going to give them some rosy cheeks using R000, R11, and R20. And I will also color in the insides of their ears and do the mouse's nose. I did that with the R20. Some of the animals, I didn't want their insides of the ears to be quite as dark, like the deer, so I didn't use the R20 on that, but I did use it for all of their cheeks. and then I just go around the edges with the R11 and blend out the inner ear. And then I go even softer with the R000, and that is what I threw into the deer's inner ear, just so it has just a hint of the pink, but isn't quite so pink as some of the other critters. Just seemed to make sense for the deer for me. And then I also wanted to color in the mouse's tail with this combo and give him some little pink feet. So once I have all that done, I will bring in the R22 as well, and I'm going to do some of the candies since we have that pink in the pattern paper. So I'm using that R22 first, blending out with the R20, and then I'll use the R11 for the highlight. So I just skipped the R000, and I also did some of the candies in the jack-o'-lantern containers with that R22. Then I brought in N3, N5, N7, and N9, and I'm going to do the little witches hats for all of my critters. And I accidentally threw a little bit of black into the center of the buckle on my deer, and then realized that should actually be the color of the hat band. So I ended up taking a 0 marker, which is just the pure alcohol, and going over that enough that I could remove most of it. I did that off screen, but it's just a real quick and easy fix. It kind of pushes the color into the cardstock, so it's not quite so prominent, and then you can go over it with something else as long as it's dark enough to cover it up. So I thought about doing the witches hats in different colors, but since the background of that pattern paper is black, I thought the witches hats all being black would also help tie the critters together throughout the scene. So I just decided to do them all the same. I started with the N9, laid in my shadows with that, and then blended out with the N7. And I wasn't sure how light I wanted my highlights to be, so I also had the N3 pulled out, but I ended up filling in everything on the top part of the hat with the N5 as the highlight. And so then I wanted to have the lower part of the hat, or the inner part of the hat that you see around their faces. I thought I would make that just a little bit lighter so it would be bright around their faces rather than being really dark. So I'm actually going to start with the N5 for that. So the lightest on the top of the hat is going to become the darkest on the inside of the hat. And I'm just carefully placing that right close to their faces, because that would be the part that would not get the most light. The outer edges that are more open would get the most light. So the N5 for that. And then I will start to blend that out with the N3. And then I'll have to bring in a third shade just to make the highlighted areas nice and bright. So another thing that I thought would have been fun would be to color the inside of the hat to match the hat band. I think that would have been a fun detail as well, but I decided not to get too carried away with all of the colors since we did also have the colorful pattern paper. I really wanted the colored elements to be mostly in the candy, so I decided to keep it a little bit more neutral for the witches hats for this particular card. And then I also used the N9, N7, and N5 to do the face on the little ghost balloon that the mouse is holding. I think that is such a fun little detail. Super cute little image. And then I used the N0 marker to add the shading to the white part of the balloon. I thought it was the N1. I must have accidentally had the wrong cap on that marker, but anyway. And then I used the N7, N5, and N3 to do my jack-o'-lantern faces. So I decided to go with the black. Like I said, I wanted the colors, the vibrancy to really come from the pattern paper and to highlight the candy to reflect that pattern paper and not to get too crazy with bright colors on the rest of the elements. So I just went neutral for that as well. I added a touch of BG10 to the top of my candy corn so that it would be just white, just have a little bit of definition there. And then I used BG10, BG11, and BG13 for 2 more of my candies. And I also did the other stripes and ends of the orange striped candies with that BG10, but I must have not hit record when I did that. And then I brought in BG15 and BG18 and decided to do the hat bands for all of my little critters with this combo. So BG18 is the darkest, and then I'm going to blend out with BG15, and BG13 will be my highlight. And this is to tie in with the background that I'm going to be doing in just a little bit. So again, I did all 3 the same. And then I'm also going to do some of the little candies in the containers that are open, the little jack-o'-lantern containers. And I did one of the kind of swirly candies with this combo as well, with the BG18 and the BG10. And then I'm going to switch to some yellow. I'm going to use Y13, Y15, and Y17 for the bottoms of my candy corns and for my last little swirly candy. Just starting with the Y17, blending out with the Y15, and then using the Y13 for the highlight. I also use this for the buckles on my hats, but I decided it was a little bit too bright, and so I wanted to mute it down just a bit so it didn't look like the candy. And so I brought in Y28 and just added a touch of that into the shadowed areas, and that muted it down just enough. I grabbed a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen and went over the spots on my deer's hindquarters. And then I went over the eyes of my critters with a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen. It took me a while to get that going off to the side. This is my first card that I've created post-vacation, and so my supplies have been sitting for a couple of weeks in my craft room, and this pen did not want to start, but I finally got it going and went over the eyes of my critters. It just makes them a little bit brighter and more shiny, brings the critters to life a bit. And once I was done with that, I trimmed all of these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I have trimmed down a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock to 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 because I am making a square card today. And I am going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink, and I'm starting with some Salvage Patina right in the center. I want to keep the center nice and light. Then I'm going to bring in peacock feathers, and I'll add that on all 4 sides and just pull that toward the center. So I'm going to lay on a good bit of that and just work my way toward that Salvage Patina in the center. Still leaving some white space in between where I'm going to blend these 2 inks together, but I want to have a nice border of the peacock feathers first, and then I'll go back to that Salvage Patina and start to blend these 2 together. I was using a brand new ink blending foam for the Salvage Patina. My old one got kind of torn up, so that also takes a little bit because there's not as much ink on the foam, so it's a little bit harder to blend. But it just took time working back and forth between those 2 colors until I had a look that I was happy with. So once I had that fairly smoothed out, I'm going to bring in my 3rd shade, which is going to be Black Soot. I want to create a really moody night sky for Halloween, so I'm going to darken up all of these corners and just add a little bit of spook factor to this card. So I'm just bringing in that black soot and going right over the peacock feathers, but just not quite bringing it as far as the peacock feathers. I actually wish I had brought the black soot in a little bit further because there will be a frame over this card as well. So most of the black soot ended up getting covered up in the final card. There's still a little hint of it there to add to that spooky night sky, but I would have liked to bring the black soot in just a little bit farther if I were to do the card again, but I still really love how it turned out. So it's all good. But like I said, if I'm going to recreate it, which I never do, I would bring the black soot in a little bit farther so that you could see it on the finished night sky. So I'm just working my way back and forth again, making sure that blend is how I want it, that I have enough of that darkness around the edges and a little bit of that black soot kind of graying out the brighter colors to give it that spooky feel. So once I am happy with how that is looking, I am going to distress it a bit, and I am first going to just spritz on some plain water. I'm adding that to an acrylic block just to give me a little bit more control and tapping it off the block with a thin paintbrush, making sure that I get nice little splatters all over the background. And once I am happy with that, I will let it soak into the cardstock for about 30 seconds to a minute so it can react with those Distress Oxide inks, and then I'll blot it up with a paper towel. And I could see that I didn't have quite as much on the upper left as I wanted, so I did that a second time and just blotted that up once again. I like that look a bit better. Then I'm also going to distress with some of these inks. I'm going to use the peacock feathers first, add a little bit of water to that to make it more fluid, and then tap that all over the background. I really love how that looked in the darker areas where the black soot was. I just thought it really stood out beautifully there. And just tap that until I had enough coverage, and then I'm going to do the same with the black soot. And this is really going to give it that kind of spooky feel with the little black flecks throughout the sky. Just something a little bit, gives a little bit more interest. And then once I'm done with the black, I'm actually going to go one more step further because I want to have some stars in the background. So I'm going to take some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of that with my paintbrush. Just cleaned it off first to make sure I don't contaminate my white paint with my black soot on the paintbrush. I'll add a bit of that to the acrylic block, add some water to it. It's gotten a little bit harder over the years, so just adding a little bit of water loosens it up again. And then I'm going to tap this all over the background as well. And I love using that super fine paintbrush because it really gives you that really fine splatter, which is what I like. I love the look of that. It gives the look of like a lot of distant stars in the sky. So I'm going to set this panel aside to dry completely. And in the meantime, I'm going to go back to my Echo Park Spooktacular Halloween 6x6 and choose a contrasting pattern to work with the original one that I had picked out. So I'm just flipping through. I thought I was going to go with this orange and white stripe, but I ended up choosing this tone-on-tone orange star print. I just thought that that looked really nice with the candies. And I am going to die cut both of these using the Hello Bluebird Gallery Frame number 7. So I'll run it through twice, once with each piece of pattern paper. And then once I have all of my pieces, I will discard the outer pieces, set aside all of the inner squares for another project, and then I'm going to swap the inner part of the frame with the opposite one so that I have a contrasting pattern on each of these. So technically I could have made 2 cards at once using these 2 frames, but I'm just going to make one today. I'll go ahead and tape them both together and then just keep the extra one in the pattern paper pad so that I have it to use to make a quick and easy card next time. But in the meantime, I am going to just take some regular Scotch tape, the same kind of tape that you use to seal your Christmas presents with or any kind of present with, and I am going to tear those strips in half because they're a little bit too wide, but then it's perfect because I can use one on 2 sides, which is great. And then I'm going to just tape these 2 pieces together from the back so that they're one frame again. So I'll do this for both of the frames. I'm just showing you how I did one on screen, but I did them both exactly the same. And once I have them together, I will assess and decide which one I want to use on today's card and which one I want to save for later. And I ended up deciding to go with the candy on the outer part of the frame for today. I just really liked the black outline, especially since I lost some of the black outline on the background. I also trimmed down 2 pieces of black licorice cardstock from Lawn Fawn with the Hello Bluebird Hill and Dale dies. And I am going to add these to the back of my frame to give my critters some ground to stand on. So I'm just lining that up where I want it on the lower part of the frame, and then I'll trim off any excess. And then the upper part of the frame, the bar is a little bit shorter than the lower part of the frame. So I did decide that I needed to trim that down a bit, otherwise it would have been too tall. I wanted to match the lower one. So I just used my scissors because the bottom edge was going to be covered up anyway by the pattern paper. And then I will glue this one into place just using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Add a thin little bead of glue there and then line up that hill right behind the frame. I'm moving on to my card base, and I cut this down to be 10.5 by 5.25 and then scored it in half at the 5.25 mark. So the whole card closed will be 5.25 by 5.25. And then I am stamping the little squirrel with his Halloween basket and the sentiment that says, "Have a frightfully sweet Halloween," which I think is super adorable. And now I'm ready to start assembling. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my background piece to the front of my card. And that should fit perfectly. So I'm just lining up the corners and squeezing them into place. Then I'll set the frame over top, but I'm not going to adhere it down just yet because I have these little clouds from the Light of the Moon die from Hello Bluebird from the Halloween kit, which is where all the stamp sets were from as well. And I have die cut the clouds from that die set with some Lawn Fawn pearlescent vellum, and I want to use these to kind of set the scene. But I don't want to glue them down too much because if you add glue behind vellum, it's very easy to show. So I have to be a little bit careful with my placement. So I kind of peeled off the release papers of the foam tape that I'd added behind the frame, and I'm using that to pick up the clouds so that it kind of holds them into place, and then I can add glue behind the foam tape. So I added a little bit of glue to the top one. I probably shouldn't have done that yet, but thankfully I didn't mess up anything. I should have waited until I had these lower ones on there first. But now I'm going to work on the bottom section. So I use one of the clouds at the top, and then the bottom ones I'm using the same die. There's actually 3 dies in this set, but I just die cut one of them twice because I knew only a little bit of it would show, so they wouldn't look identical anyway. So I'm just making sure that my clouds are going to appear how I want them in the scene, and then picking them up with that foam tape like I said. And then once I have them, I can remove the rest of the foam tape behind this frame. That's going to pop it up a bit and add some dimension to my scene. So I'll just peel off all of those release papers, and then I can add some liquid glue behind the foam tape like I mentioned, and that's going to hold those vellum clouds down into place without any glue showing. And then I'll just trim off any excess of the vellum clouds before I adhere it into place. So now I just have to line that up nice and straight, making sure those corners are straight on there, and I can pop it down into place. Then I will bring in my images, and I'm going to add them to the scene with a mix of foam tape and liquid glue. So I kind of laid them out ahead of time and figured out where I would need foam tape, and then just using liquid glue on anything that it was going to go over, anything that's already popped up. So the hills are popped up, the frame is popped up, anything that would be in the recess of that area needs some foam tape so it's all on the same level and nothing is getting kind of bent and crunched up if it goes through the mail. So I added my deer down in the bottom left corner and the fox in the bottom right. And then I'm going to have my hedgehog in the top right corner. I like to add my biggest images first and then work my way down to the smaller images. So next I'm going to add my little mouse. And I love this die because it's just so easy to fill in the little squares, and it always makes such a cute little scene come to life. So I'm adding that little mouse with his little ghost balloon up in the top right corner. The speech bubble is going to be the sentiment on the front of my card. I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue behind that and adding it to the center crossbar on the card. And then I can start adding in all of these little accessories, like the tiny little jack-o'-lantern candy container that's going to go next to the mouse. And then I've got extra candy corns that I'm going to add around the hedgehog. So I have two kind of overlapping in front of him, and then I'll have one resting behind him. So just turning them in different ways to make it look like they've kind of just tumbled around. And then I'll start adding in the candies to kind of fill in the rest of the blank space. So I've got a little swirly candy down with my fox, and then I'm going to have a lollipop and another candy down with the deer, and then he's got a little bit of room behind him. I'm just making sure that the lollipop is in front there, so I just was adjusting those candies until they were laying how I wanted them. I'll add a little candy up with the mouse, and then like I said, the deer has some space behind him, so I added another candy there. And then I was kind of looking to see if any of the other candies would fit anywhere else, but only the lollipop I had room for. I added that up by the mouse and kind of tucked the stem behind the sentiment. And then the other two I just decided to leave off the card. I didn't want to overcrowd things. But there was a little bit of blank space up in that top right corner where the hedgehog was. So I decided to take one of the bats from that Light of the Moon die set. And I die cut all three because I wasn't sure which one I wanted, and I was just trying them out to see which one I liked. And I ended up going with this one here. I thought about trying to fit another one on the scene, but it just really wasn't going to work because the scenes were kind of full already. So I just added this one to that top corner right over the vellum moon. And I think that was a fun little detail. Just him swooping in makes it look extra spooky. Then I added a little bit of Stardust Stickles to give this card a bit of glitter. I'm going to add it to all of the candy. So I have it on the candy corns, the lollipops, and all of the little wrapped candies as well. And of course the candies that are inside the little jack-o'-lanterns. And that is going to finish off this card. So I am going to lift it up so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. I really love how this one came out, and I hope that you enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products I use will be listed and linked down in the description bar below the video in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!